The longest-serving mayor in Miamisburg history will walk away from the job on December 31st, 2019. Dick Church Jr. is retiring after 7 terms in office, 28 years. With 2019 winding down, we spent some time with the mayor at various spots around the city, where he shared some recollections from his long career in public service and his personal memories of a lifetime spent right here in Miamisburg. You were elected to your first and only term on Miamisburg City Council in the late 80s. And on election night, at your victory party, you promptly announced that you would be a candidate for mayor 4 years later.
Right.
That's a pretty bold act, wasn't it?
That was very bold. After the results came in and I placed second, I knew daggone good and well I was going to announce for mayor. So we must have had 100 people down there that night. And I thanked them for their help, and I said, I'm going to need your help again in 4 years, because 4 years from this election, I will be running for mayor of Miamisburg. And that's made it rough on the city manager, John Wyhofer, at the time, but because, well, there was some tension, especially when Mayor Lucas and myself were in the same room.
Sure.
Mayor Lucas knew that I was going to be running against him, and that didn't go over too good.
So that's exactly what you did. You
I did.
ran for mayor 4 years later,
Right.
and it was a razor-close election.
I won by 26 votes at the night of the election, and he wanted to recount, and we had to recount, and I picked up a vote. I won the mayor's race by 27 votes.
Mm-hmm. You became mayor, and you had sold the family business, so you were essentially retired. And the mayor's job in Miamisburg is a part-time job.
Right.
But you have always approached it as a full-time job, haven't you?
Right. There was 2 commitments I made when I ran. I said, first, I'll do the best job I can do for you.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, I will be a full-time mayor. And hopefully I lived up to it.
After defeating the incumbent mayor, Don Lucas, Mayor Church only faced one other challenger in the course of the next 28 years. What makes that somewhat amazing is that this lifelong Democrat has served mostly alongside Republicans during that time, and Miamisburg is widely considered to be a conservative community. You are currently the only elected Democrat in Miamisburg.
Right.
In fact, over the years, you have served with mostly Republicans on
Right.
city council.
Right.
Has that ever hampered the ability of this city to get things done?
No, not in the least, because anybody that knows me, I might have the tag Democrat on my name. You have to work with people of the other party. In local government, I don't feel there's no Republican decision ever been made around this table, or no Democratic decision made around this table. It's people that ran for council and the mayor that love the community. They want to see it grow. They want to work together. And I've always put politics, even though I'm aware of it, I've always put that in the back seat.
Politics, however, was front and center when Mayor Church made his one and only run for higher office. In 2000, at the strong urging of the local party and longtime Congressman Tony Hall, he ran for a vacant seat in the Ohio House of Representatives.
I gave in. Tony Hall really convinced me that I ought to. So I ran, and I said, I put my committee together. It was a 3-way race. It was Mayor Dick Hartman from Kettering, John Husted, who worked for the Dayton Chamber, and myself.
The mayor was defeated in that race, And he says two things about the experience left a lasting impression about the realities of politics. First was the constant need to raise money, and second was being the target of negative campaigning.
They started running ads against me. The Republican Party did, John Huston. I was depicted as the worst mayor Miamisburg ever had. I had made a statement at the Dayton Daily News. You had to go before the editorial board back then. Mm-hmm. And one of the questions asked me at the editorial board station was, what is your biggest regret as mayor? I said, a couple of years ago we put on the ballot an issue for a new rec center for the community. And I said, it got defeated. And I said, I've often thought if I would have worked harder, maybe that would have passed. Well, that was the crux of the ads that the Republican Party put on me. They said that my biggest regret was I didn't stick the citizens of Miamisburg with a $25 million, they didn't say rec center issue, that's all they said. And that ad, and I don't know where they got the picture, and watching political ads since that time, they picked the worst picture, and where they get them, I don't know. But here it is. I'm depicted as the taxable mayor from Miamisburg. That went on for a week, and I still picture that. And I vowed I always wanted to be mayor. I shouldn't have been talked into it, but I let them, and I did work hard, but I don't think my heart was in it.
You talked about the sometimes ugliness of politics that reared its head when you ran for state representative.
Right.
What do you think of the state of politics in this country right now?
Oh, it's the lowest point it's ever been. When I watch TV, I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed of both Republicans and Democrats, how they're acting. It's a wonder we get anything done in this country. Put this politics crap aside. Do what's best for America. That's what this town's been about.
And who better should know what this town's been about than Dick Church? He's lived here virtually his entire life. This is the first of his childhood homes, still standing on Main Street, just a short distance from downtown. He lived here with his late mother and father and his older brother, Jim.
I was here for the first 4 years of my life. I was born in St. Anne's Hospital, which was part of the St. Elizabeth hospital system, and my parents lived in the house behind us here, and so this was where I came with them after birth, and we lived here till I was 4 years old.
The family moved to West Virginia as Dad pursued a business opportunity involving a greenhouse, but the lure of Miamisburg proved strong.
After about a year, my brother and Mom and Dad, they were really homesick for Miamisburg. So we came up, and at that time we lived in my grandmother's farmhouse, which Viking Heating and Air and the old Sarah Jane's restaurant. And there was this white house in the middle, and that was my grandmother's house. And that's where I spent the rest of my childhood until we moved. Dad built a house at 448 Wally Ray Drive. And I think when I was a freshman in high school, we moved to that location. And we lived there about 7 years. And Dad built some apartment houses down at the end of our property behind the flower shop. And we moved down there. And my brother and I, we had our own apartment next door to Mom and Dad's, but we had a door cut between that we would have privacy and they'd have privacy, but we ate all our meals with Mom and Dad. So This whole area, the south of town, is where I grew up. Living at this end of town really had its advantages when I was a kid. First of all, you can hear the train whistle. We had train tracks on both sides. And every Saturday, I remember my dad would give me $1. And the Bell kids and I and Colin Pruitt and all the kids that lived in that area, we would walk uptown and we would go to the Plaza Theater. And I remember our stops were, we would go to where Ron's Pizza is now. And that corner was Slusher's Drugstore. And it had a soda fountain and everything in there. And we would get a hot fudge sundae. Then we would go across to Cocky Porter's hamburger wagon and get a hamburger, which was 10 cents then. And where the trailer sits today, well, it was along Main Street, but on that side of the south end of the building. But they were right there, south corner of Main and Central. Then we would go to Dad's popcorn stand, which was really an alleyway that somebody had built a front on, and this guy popped popcorn, and it was Dad's popcorn, and we would get us a bag of popcorn. We had a couple 5 and 10 cent stores there. Ada Marsh's, Jansen's, and there was Walcott's. Back before Philhar's moved their drugstore, it was Donahue's 5 and 10. And we would go in there and just look at toys and not buy, but look, and then pester our parents later that we wanted something we saw. And then we'd go to the Plaza Theater, and I would take about a quarter back out of that $1. Those were opportunities kids today wouldn't even know about. Some parents wouldn't even let their kids walk uptown from that end of town.
Just a short distance from where we are and where your homes were as a young boy,
Yeah.
was the U.S. Department of Energy's Mound facility, which at that time had armed guards and barbed wire fence. But you ventured up there occasionally, didn't you?
We ventured up
Tell
there.
me about that.
We would have picnic days, and Bill and Christine Babbington, her parents, would fix us up big picnic lunch. The kids we'd all go up on the hill, and a couple times we ventured to the fence line, and the guards were right there. They, you kids get off of here. And I joke about those guards ran me off, but little did they know that someday that little kid they ran off the property, they're going to be handing over the deed to the facility too. So I've had quite a laugh about that.
Young Dick Church began school at the Auditorium School, which later became Kinder Elementary and is still in use today on Central Avenue. He remembers later serving as a bus patrol boy, and one somewhat frightful incident on the bus that you'd never see in today's safety-conscious world.
We got on the bus in front of Bell Vault, and one day a car did not stop and went to the right of the school bus and around and back onto the road. Well, our school bus driver then was W.W. Sells. He was a sergeant with the Miamisburg Police Department.
Okay.
And back then, part-time driver for the school. We got the kids on. He told everybody, sit down and hold on. We chased that speeder with the school bus, and we didn't have a siren, but Bill was laying on the horn, and every time he was motioning like that, pull over. Well, the guy finally pulled over. Bill got out and had some chosen words for him, and then pulled his ticket book out and issued the guy a ticket. Oh boy, you talk about conversation at school that day. We were on an arrest.
Yeah, right.
But Bill later became the chief of police in Miamisburg.
You developed your dream of being mayor in high school.
Right.
Tell us how that happened.
Okay. One day I was called to the principal's office, scared me to death. I didn't know what trouble I might have got into. And
Probably the first time.
yeah. No, it was not the first time. But that's why I was so concerned. And but anyway, when I got there, Louis Mittler was our principal. And back then, the teachers selected who went to Boys State and Girls State. I didn't know anything about either one. And anyway, he calls me in the office, and he didn't ask me if I could go. He said, "You've been selected, and you're going to Buckeye Boys State, and it's all paid for by the American Legion." So we left for Camp Perry on Lake Erie. Before that, I had no interest at all in government. I was just a kid and carefree, you know. That 9 days at Boys State really changed my life. It piqued my interest in wanting to serve.
Mm-hmm.
So I came back, I was a junior, and I told my classmates that one day I was going to be mayor of Miamisburg, because I knew I was never going to leave the community. My folks, I guess I was a spoiled kid from the beginning. I knew that someday I had half a business that was going to be mine. And my folks started Church's Flower Shop in 1946. And so anyway, I told my classmates, knowing that I wasn't going to leave Miamisburg, that one day I'd be mayor of Miamisburg. Well, it took 33 years, but I finally made it.
You met your wife Judy as a young person
Yes.
in Miamisburg,
Yes.
and you've been married how long now?
52 years.
52 years.
Right.
Tell us about how you came together, how you met.
Okay. Well, we met as members of the Miamisburg High School Marching Band. Judy played the flute and I carried the flag. And later on I would play the bass drum at pep rallies and stuff like that. But I was in the color guard. I'm 4 years older than Judy. And I'd ask her out, but her mom wouldn't let her go out with me. I was too old.
Okay.
So anyway, she was beautiful, and I dated around. Judy also went to St. Jacob Church, where I do, and she graduated from high school. Then she went to Miami Valley School of Nursing. Well, it was between graduation from high school and nursing that I called her out, and my mother-in-law didn't have any say then.
She approved?
She approved.
Okay.
Yeah, and so, well, I think she did, but no, she was a good woman, and most people kid about their mother-in-law. She was a good woman. But Judy and I, we started dating, and then we broke up. She had told me that she had been dating another guy, and I kind of hurt my ego.
Uh-huh.
So we broke up, and it wasn't until a Rotary conference that was held out at the old Imperial House South. Judy was working the desk with her good friend Charlene Geyser. I kept going back out in the hall and talking to Judy. I'd make every excuse in the book to go back out and talk to Judy. Well, long story short, that was my last date with the girl that I had taken to the conference. And Judy and I started dating, I think, the next day again. We got married on April the 8th, 1967.
Your brother Jim still lives in town here, and you see him quite frequently.
Right. Jim was 8 years older than me. And this past weekend, we moved him into the Sycamore Glen high-rise, and he has an apartment there now. But yeah, Jim and I are close.
Long before he entered public office, Mayor Church was heavily involved in his community. Well, let me run through some of the ways that you have provided community service and get some of your remembrances, some of your observations of those things. Okay? Let's start with your role as a youth baseball coach as a young man in Miamisburg.
Back when I was a member of the fire department, we decided that we needed to sponsor a team. So myself, Norman Mason, Dick Crabtree, we said, well, if we're going to sponsor it, we're going to coach it. So I was selected as a manager, and they were my assistant coaches. And for 8 years, I was involved in the baseball program here in Miamisburg. The fire department, Class E team, we won our league a couple times during those years. I had a great team. And some of the outstanding players at Miamisburg High School started it with the Class E and the Miamisburg Fire Department team.
Your church is also something that you've been
Right.
heavily involved in through
Right.
the years. Describe your service there.
Well, after graduating from high school, I went to Miami University, and I stayed 1 year. And college and me didn't get along. And so I came home and always had attended St. Jacob Church. And Pastor Rajala, he asked me one day, he says, how about if you take over the youth program here at our church? And I did, and started out small, and it kept getting bigger. And in front of the educational wing at the church was the old parsonage. Pastor Rajala and his family, the church had bought a new parsonage out on Lawrence Avenue, and they were going to tear down the old parsonage. And I came up with a wild idea. While I was at Miami, I attended the Lutheran church down there, and they had a similar program, and they called it Luther House. And I thought, boy, that old parsonage, that's just an idea for a youth center. So went to Pastor Rajala. He was for it, but he says, you know, it's got to be a vote of the congregation. And it was a pretty hot issue. Some of the people in the congregation wanted to tear it down. Others wanted to be a youth center. It passed at a congregational vote, and so Luther House started forming. And at one time I had over 100 kids, high school kids, that were attending Luther House. But we tried to keep them active in some of the problems that they were going to be facing in life.
Yeah.
That was the crux of what we were trying to get across these kids. And I think we did a fairly good job.
Sure.
And I was proud of the program.
Mayor Church also became a Mason at the age of 21 and later joined the Antioch Shrine Temple, where he has been a member for over 40 years. He eventually was elected leader of that organization, the Potentate, in 1989. This is a scene from the Potentate's Ball that year, where he was accompanied by his wife Judy and his father, Dick Sr.
A lot of the people in Miamisburg belonged to the Shrine, and the Shriners would come here for parades. Those are the things I like, the kind of the ceremonial part where you march down the street. I'm a little bit of a ham. I love a parade. But I also like what they did, operating these hospitals that helped the burned and disabled kids throughout North America. So I thought, that's the branch of Masonry that I really want to get involved with. So I joined the Shrine. My father-in-law belonged to the marching patrol, as did Tom Costello and Roy Gephardt and Gene Huffman, people from Miamisburg, Jerry Baker, people that I knew. So I thought, well, I think I'd like to march. I was in the high school band and enjoyed that. So I joined the marching patrol, and we paraded I don't think there's a town in this Miami Valley region that at some time I haven't marched in.
Your public service then extended to the local government for the first time, and it really started out in the areas of public safety. Tell us a little bit about that.
Bill Sells was the police chief and a good friend of my parents. And he said to me one day, he says, I need a dispatcher. My dispatcher quit. I need a dispatcher. And so I became a full-time dispatcher with the city of Miamisburg. Worked 12 at night till 8 in the morning. Loved that. Of course, we're right next door to the fire department. They called them back then sleepers. It was guys, and all of us were single at the time. We slept at the fire department, got paid $1 a night by the city to be there, and we were the first responders. Back then, on any call, you'd blow the fire whistle and everybody showed up. Mm-hmm. But they needed people during the night that would respond to accidents or fires or whatever until the rest of them got there. But I remember Randy Staley, who later went on to be the chief of the Washington Township Fire Department. Norm Mason was one of the sleepers, and he later became the chief of the Miamisburg Fire Department, full-time chief. And Don Pettigrew and Ralph Degler, we called him Grandpa, and we were the sleepers.
You've said that the most important development with the local government in Miamisburg in your lifetime was the development of the city charter in the 1960s.
Right.
And you played a role in the development of that charter. Tell us about that.
Jane Chance, the late Jane Chance, who was later a council person, and a school named after her, Jane Chance Elementary. She was president of the Junior Women's Club. And the Junior Women's Club came up with the idea that they felt that the city needed to look at a change in how we operated. Before the charter, it was a strong mayor form of government, but the mayor wasn't there 24 hours a day. He would appoint a safety director to do his agenda for him during the day to make sure things went according to the way they should. And Jane and the Women's Club thought that we needed to look at bringing professional people in. So they came up with the idea of the council manager form of government. They went back to council, and council told them, don't want any part of it. Everything's fine the way it is. So, knowing Jane Chance, Jane didn't take no for an answer. So this ladies club or women's club, they went out and got petitions for a referendum by the voters. And there was 2 questions that had to be decided, and they were both voted on the same election. The first question was, shall we look in, or should a committee be formed to write a charter for the city of Miamisburg? And along with that, there was a charter commission that had to be elected. Now, if the first issue failed, the second one was void about who got elected. But 30 people ran for the charter commission. And I'm proud of the fact that at the age I was back then, I was the top vote getter. And both issues passed. The top 15 people then became members of the Charter Commission. We had 1 year that we had to really write the Constitution for the city. And that was probably the most interesting year of my life. November of 1965, it went to a vote of the people. And it passed by 4 votes. 4 votes. The charter was to go into effect January the 1st, 1968. So they really had 1 year to start planning. And I have to give Bob Mears all the credit in the world. He was elected mayor in '67, November election, and he was the first mayor under the charter. And if it hadn't been for Bob keeping the council that was elected, because they were all the old school, and things had to change. First of all, we had to hire a city manager, and there was a search, and John Laney became our first city manager. And John and Bob together got us started on the right foot to become the city we are today. I think we've evolved into a well-respected community in the region, and we've had good city managers.
Mayor Church also spent 13 years on the city's Recreation Board, which was a group that had complete oversight of recreation facilities before the charter was formed. It was also during the 1960s that the community was embroiled in a very contentious issue: whether or not to sell the city's electric utility, known as the municipal light plant. He recalled some of the details on that, as well as other local controversies that he's seen and even instigated.
My grandfather, Liz Stansel, was the chief engineer at the Miamisburg power plant. And I grew up hearing about the power plant. So my family, we were against the sale. My dad ran for city council about that time. At that election that my dad was elected, it was also voted to sell the power plant. He had voted against it as an individual. And the controversy kept going. There was people showing up at council meetings, and the council had the final vote after the election. Either go with what the majority of the citizens wanted or vote no. Well, my dad found out a lot of facts, and he voted to sell the light plant as a city councilman. And looking back now, we could not have kept up with all the regulations that go with power plants and electric companies. The power plant sold for $5.2 million. We still have that $5.2 million in a municipal trust fund. It's overseen by a appointed committee. It's in the charter. At times there have been people that get elected council says, why don't we use that to do certain things? And I would be against that, to be quite honest with you. It's a good savings account for us.
The second sort of divisive issue that I wanted you to talk about in your adult life was the demolition of the original Miamisburg High School.
Oh, the old Miamisburg High School was, after it was decommissioned as a high school, it did serve as like a mid-high for a while. They called it the South Building, and then they called it the Bell Building. But when they quit using it altogether, they started taking things out of the building, ceiling tile, lighting fixtures. They were making the building look like it really needed to be tore down. It was a very solid building. There was a lot of controversy. I wish I'd have been more outspoken and made my feelings felt. Not that everybody was going to listen, but I represented, I think, the feelings of the biggest part of the community. That building should have been saved and used to some capacity. But decision of the school board, superintendent convinced them needed to come down. Well, they bring the wrecking crew in, and there was a lot of people there watching. And the big ball on that they swing into a building they're getting ready to tear down, it bounced off the building twice. Didn't put a dent in it. And on the third one, it started caving in. My class, at one of our reunions, I don't know which one it was after the building was torn down, we have a t-shirt. I've got that at home somewhere. It shows the old school being torn down, big gap in the middle of it, and it said, "We survived, our school didn't."
Your first controversial issue as a member of Miamisburg City Council involved sidewalks.
Right.
Something that you would think would be routine and simple.
Right.
Wasn't the case, was it?
It wasn't. We had a lot of plats that were built without any sidewalks at all. One day I was out mowing the grass and I saw this little girl coming down the street, and she was riding a small bicycle, and she was going pretty fast. She got to the end of my property and she saw that the sidewalk ended. She darted out in the street with a bike, and a car really put on the brakes to keep from hitting her. We're also, where we lived, there was Mound School. Kids were walking to Mound School in the street. And I thought, this is not right. We need sidewalks. So I brought it up at council. Well, Mayor Lucas, who was the city mayor then, and I'd already announced I was going to run for mayor against him at the next election. When I took the position that we needed sidewalks, he took the opposite position that we didn't need them. There was 7 on council. 4 of the 7 agreed with me that we needed it. And anyway, it went to a referendum of the citizens, and citywide, not just that neighborhood. And it passed, or not unanimously, it passed by a pretty good margin. So that was my first controversial issue. Some of the neighbors didn't like me for a while, but in my heart, I still think we did the right thing. Kids can walk on sidewalks, and of course today people walk all the time. We got people walking the neighborhood for exercise, and they don't have to walk in the street.
You're a man of faith. You've never really hidden that fact from the public, and you've made a point during your career as mayor to visit churches in Miamisburg that belong to the Miamisburg Ministerial Association.
Right.
You've done that on a routine basis.
For 28 years.
Well, a few years ago, you took a unique step as an elected official, and you declared a year of the Bible in Miamisburg.
That's right.
Boy, that struck a chord with some groups, didn't it?
Yes, it did. I was approached by some individuals from some of the churches that asked me, would you mind doing this proclamation? Well, the mayor does all kinds of proclamations throughout the year, as you know. And I said, well, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I agreed with what was in there. And it was the headline of the Miamisburg News. And shortly after that, we got our first letter from the ACLU that the mayor needs to rescind that proclamation. And I'm not rescinding any proclamation. I believe everything that's in there. There was the wording now. in the final thing, I urged every citizen of Miamisburg to participate in the Year of the Bible. And by that one word, everyone, I think that's what set the ACLU off. But anyway, this went on for months, and I was receiving letters of support from 37 states. People in 37 states knew about this and were sending me letters of support. I was on talk radio in Los Angeles, in a couple towns in Texas, in one, I believe, in Georgia or somewhere down there. That was after the final ultimatum. The ACLU sent a letter that if by a certain date, that if the mayor did not rescind that proclamation, they were going to sue the mayor, they were going to sue the city of Miamisburg, and I remember the city manager and the law director, Phil Callahan and John Wyhofer. They came into my office and they says, "Dick, you got to rescind that proclamation." I said, "Not going to do it." I says, "I believe in what it is." I said, "I'm not going to do it." And then they told me, they said, "Do you know how much this is going to cost if we get into lawsuits?" And this city does not have that kind of money to pay out for that. So I went to a couple ministers in town that I always kind of leaned on for advice, and told them the predicament we were in. And they said, "Dick, you've done what you set out to do. The word is out there because of all this publicity." Their goal was to give out, I think, a couple hundred Bibles during the year. 800, I think, was the exact amount. They wound up giving over 8,000 citizens of Miamisburg got a Bible. And anyway, they said, "We understand." And the hardest thing I ever did was, you called a press conference for me, and television cameras came down, and I stood there and had to rescind that proclamation. That was probably one of the saddest days of my life.
The Year of the Bible proclamation got national attention, and there was once the mayor was even on the international stage. That was during a trip to Russia by him and a group of other U.S. mayors. They were there to see nuclear facilities like those in this country that were being decommissioned. Communism may have been officially dead in the former Soviet Union, but reminders were evident.
It was January, I remember, and we flew into Moscow and spent the first night in Moscow, but before we walked over to Red Square, and I never thought that this boy from Miamisburg would ever walk in Red Square. It was a good experience. We stayed at this hotel. It was, when you entered it, it was like some of the World War II movies. They had the gate, just the one bar. They had soldiers with machine guns standing there. First thing they did was come in, took our passports, and then we went into the hotel. We had a KGB person assigned to us. We could not go anywhere without that KGB. And I'd always heard that the Lenin statues were all taken down. But I got news for you. Lenin statues are all over Russia. They were when I was there. And there was a big Lenin statue out in the courtyard outside the hotel. And one morning I come out and I got my camera, and I just start out the door, and all at once this KGB guy comes up and he says, "Where are you going?" I said, I want to take a picture of the statue. I will escort you. And he escorted me out, and I took my pictures, and he escorted me back in the hotel.
Many of the people who call Miamisburg home have a real appreciation for the community's rich heritage. The mayor is one of those people. He loves talking about that history and living it. We're standing now at a very historic location in Miamisburg, and it's a place that I think most residents wouldn't realize existed. It's a building that's located just west of the Great Miami River along State Route 725. Tell us what happened at this site.
Well, we believe the year was 1904. Teddy Roosevelt was in his first term as President of the United States, and he was crossing the country making speeches trying to get elected for his second term. He stopped here in Miamisburg, and where we're standing is where he made the speech to just hundreds of people that turned out. But there was just a raft of people out there, and he went on and got reelected to his second term.
Sure.
But I won't say it started here in Miamisburg, but we were part of it.
So while Teddy Roosevelt was the only sitting U.S. president to visit Miamisburg, this community has been the site of some campaign stops by presidential candidates.
Right. John Kennedy came through on Old 25. Now, the reason it was Old 25, Interstate 75 hadn't been built yet. So he came up Old 25. Our flower shop was at the south end of town, so we all went out. He gave us a big wave, and they took him right down Main Street.
You were on the sidewalk and you saw him?
Yes.
Okay.
And he was waving at everybody, and it was good to see him. Jimmy Carter was here, and there's a story behind that. Charlie Case, a former city councilman, was head of the Democratic Party back in those days. And he called me and he said, "Are you and Judy busy on Friday night? The Democratic Party's got a person coming to speak to us." And I said, "Well, who is it?" And he says, "The governor of Georgia." And I said, "Who's the governor of Georgia?" "Well, Jimmy Carter." And I said, "I think we're busy that night." And Judy and I didn't go. He went on to become president, but he was at Fortner's Bowling Lanes in one of their meeting rooms. And we had a sitting vice president also visit Miamisburg. That was Al Gore. And again, he was running for president. And that's almost 20-some years ago. Because of the Broken Chads and all that.
Sure.
That was right at the turn of the century, or back in 2000. 2000. Yeah, it was.
Right.
And he brought Joe Lieberman with him. And I got an opportunity to talk to Lieberman. He had just been appointed the running mate about a week before he came to Miamisburg. And I asked him, I said, "Are you catching up with all these things he's got you doing?" He says, "Well, I'm running in the fast lane," but he says, "I'm doing everything they tell me." And but you could tell he was a little bit uneasy in that position. He was learning now. Gore made a talk at what we call the Anna K. Wance School, which has been torn down since. But to be quite honest with you, Gore did not come across good to me. He was sort of standoffish, and so he didn't get my vote.
Sure.
And even though I'm a Democrat, he just did not come across as someone that I wanted to see in that office.
You've had an opportunity as mayor to welcome a host of dignitaries through the years to Miamisburg. That's something you really enjoy, isn't it?
Oh, I do. We've had senators, Portman, Brown, Senator John Glenn. I know we've had a couple governors, Strickland, Bob Taft was here. He was at the mound.
Sure.
I got a picture in my office of me giving him a Mounds bar. Back then, we didn't have keys to the city, so the cheapest thing to do was give him a Mounds bar, and he was laughing about it. Senators, John Glenn was probably my very favorite. He was very personable, and just being around him, you had to respect him, whether you voted for him or not. You had to respect him because first man in space, and beyond that, he was a nice guy.
Now, there was one other president that didn't necessarily come to Miamisburg, but visited the region that you had the opportunity to meet.
Right, and that was Bill Clinton. He was on his second term re-election campaign. I was one of 10 people selected by the Democratic Party to greet the president at Dayton Airport. And we were told by all the organizers that when the president came by, I was to say, "Mr. President, I'm Dick Church, I'm the mayor of Miamisburg, welcome to Dayton." And that's all we were to say. Now I'm fourth in line, and he starts out and he gets down to me. Everybody's gone through their routine. He gets to me. "Hello, Mr. President. I'm Dick Church. I'm the mayor of Miamisburg, Ohio, and welcome to Dayton." And he keeps shaking my hand. And I thought, well, I got to say something else. So I said, "Mr. President, we are doing great things at the mound, working with your Secretary of Energy, Hazel O'Leary." He says, "I'm glad to hear that." And he keeps shaking my hand. And I said, "Well, Mr. President, our goal is to create jobs at that former nuclear site." And I said, "Working with your administration, we're going to make it happen." He says, "Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and keep up the good work."
You've had an opportunity to do some really neat things over the course of 28 years.
I have. I'm very fortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our site here is actually close to a couple other locations that hold prominent places in Miamisburg history.
Yes.
And one goes way back, and we're talking about an Indian encampment. Tell us about that and where it is.
We're on the west side of the Miami River, and I'm just guessing, but I would say within a quarter of a mile from this location, that's where the Miami Indians were first encamped. And then directly across the river is where Zachariah Hull built his stockade. And the two lived in harmony.
And at that time, Miamisburg was not known as Miamisburg.
No, it was Hull Station, named after Zachariah Hull.
Sure.
And it wasn't until February the 20th, 1818, when they had a community meeting and they changed the name from Hull Station to Miamisburg. And Miami's for the Indians, and most of our settlers were of German descent, and in Germany a small town is a burg or a borough, so they chose Miamisburg. And believe it or not, there is no other Miamisburg in the entire world.
Also nearby, the Church family had a harrowing experience at the onset of the Great Flood of 1913 that devastated this region. It took place when the mayor's father was 1 day old.
My grandfather went out to see if he could assist anybody. Well, the water started coming up so quick. And long story short, my grandmother took her 1 day old baby and they kept moving upstairs. And finally, a guy named Clayton Babbington came by in a rowboat and saved him right before the house got washed away. And my dad, they knew they were going to call him Richard, but he had no middle name at that time. So they gave him the middle name Clayton. And so he was Richard Clayton Church Sr. And when I was born, I'm Richard Clayton Church Jr. But it was the result of Clayton Babbington.
And then we jump ahead to modern history, and also not far from here was the site of the infamous Miamisburg train derailment. What are your recollections of that?
Well, that was in 1986, and I remember I was in Dayton. I was on my way home, and I saw this smoke. And I thought, boy, that's odd. And I kept going. I got down to my house, and all at once I turned the television on, and they're saying about this train that derailed in Miamisburg. They were burning sulfur, and they did everything to put it out. They were telling people they had to leave the community. My wife was a nurse at Kettering Hospital. We lived on Hillview Avenue, which was south of here, and we had 2 basset hounds. And when they're telling people to evacuate, I'm thinking, well, what am I going to do with these 2 dogs, you know? And so I decided I was going to stay in the house. And I remember I talked to Judy on the phone, and she says, well, we're not to leave the hospital because people coming in. So she was doing double duty, and they wouldn't have let her back in the community anyway. And I hunkered down in our basement on Hillview with my 2 bassets. But during that time, twice, someone knocked real loud on our front door and said, we have to evacuate. Well, I wasn't going to leave my dogs.
Perhaps nowhere is that pride in their community and pride in history more evident in Miamisburg than people's feelings about the local school district.
Yes. We are probably the most active high school alumni association in the United States. Each year, just hundreds and hundreds of people come back for the reunions of their classes, and we are the oldest active alumni reunion association in the country, and we're proud of that. Our school district is one of the top districts in the region. Wasn't always that way, but we've come a long way, and I know things have changed quite a bit since I was a graduate of Miamisburg High School in 1959. But that pride, Dad and Mom probably went to Miamisburg schools. Their kids go through the Miamisburg schools. For a lot of people, they had the same teachers because our teachers stayed. We had good athletics. The older you get, you kind of latch on to those friendships of the past. And that's why on Friday night, you see families that if you turn the clock back 50 years, their parents were at then Harmon Field rooting the Vikings on.
Last year, Miamisburg had perhaps the largest celebration in its history when it celebrated its bicentennial, 200 years. You took a very active role in that observance. Why was that so important to you?
Well, to be honest, I had been involved in the sesquicentennial. I was chairman of the 175th. There's a word for that, but I never was able to pronounce it. So we'll just call it the 175th. And I knew that the 200th birthday of our community was coming up. I toyed with the idea prior to that maybe after 6 terms I was going to step aside and retire. But then I got to thinking, the work that I've done throughout the years for the community, I would be missing probably the most important celebration in our city's history, that of the 200 years as a community. And that's why I ran for my 7th term. But it was a labor of love. I had seen how they had done the other celebrations. Started out 3 years in advance. People thought I was nuts. When I called first committee meeting, a lot of people showed. We filled the council room. And we wanted everybody to be involved. Kids, young adults, the older generation. It was a celebration that the entire community, this is where you look back at where you've been and you want to celebrate that. So to be honest, I appointed myself as chairman, and I had great help. Oh my heavens, we had over 200 volunteers.
Looking back now on that tremendous celebration, what kind of memories will you take with you?
I was having people that I had known years ago that maybe had left the community. They came up, they wanted to talk, they wanted to thank me for the celebration. And when they were thanking me, they were thanking these 200 volunteers that volunteered.
Mm-hmm.
The sense of, I can't believe what has occurred in this town since I left after graduation. Those were the kind of comments that really stick with me. Not only did they have fun, but go back to that sense of community, that tradition. It all works together. It's all in the same scope. I'll never forget every aspect of it, whether it was Founders Night and Bobby Sweeney getting up. Bobby's in her 90s, and that's the night we announced that she was going to be the Grand Marshal. The eloquent speech that Bobby gave always will be there, and people still talk about it. When I think back about the bicentennial, I feel amazed in one way, but deep down in, I knew that the community would support it, because that's just Miamisburg. I know I left a letter to the mayor of Miamisburg in the new time capsule. I stated that what we had done for the bicentennial, and then I wished her or him all the luck in the world to continue going down the path to make Miamisburg what it is. We're Miamisburg, the one and only, and it's a city where great things happen.
Now, you've said the city's two big accomplishments during your time in office have been the revitalization of downtown Miamisburg,
Right,
and the reuse of the federal government's former Mound Laboratory.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to begin with a look at the revitalization of the downtown business district.
Sure.
We are sitting now in Riverfront Park, which sits adjacent to Main Street.
Right.
This park draws thousands of people
Right.
to downtown every year with a lot of special events, concerts, things of that nature. We're on the stage. I want you to think back to what this area looked like about 20 years ago and describe it for us.
Miami Avenue, 15 years ago, was a street that had about 60 homes, a couple businesses in there. And Miami Avenue was kind of run down 20 years ago. And we had some people that were undesirables. I mean, I know of no other way to say it. Our goal was to purchase all those homes on Miami Avenue. And we did this through a $3.5 million grant from the state of Ohio. It's Clean Ohio funding. We started purchasing those homes, and as soon as we would take control, we'd tear them down. And eventually, we knew that the final goal was the creation of this park. We have over 80 some functions that take place in downtown Miamisburg, mostly on this stage during the summer months. I don't think there's another community that can even compete with us on that. Plus the great restaurants we have here. People are coming to Miamisburg to supplement the restaurants that are doing a great job of bringing people here. If you're bringing people here, you got to have activities for them to do. And hopefully they can walk up and down Main Street, which, to be quite honest with you, I'm seeing more and more of this happening. All you have to do is sit in Ron's or Bennett's window and look out on any night of the week, and you'll see people walking up and down the streets at Miamisburg.
As the mayor recounted previously, downtown was an active, vibrant place during his youth, but the district later fell on hard times, a trend playing out in downtowns big and small around the country.
Well, it really started changing around the 60s because that's when the Miamisburg Shopping Center was built. Some of the merchants downtown went to that shopping area. The Dayton Mall, I think, came in the 70s, and that's when we lost our penny store. That's when the vacancies started because they were moving to higher populated business areas. When I entered office, I believe it was 60 to 80% of our downtown stores were vacant. Mm-hmm. Today, that has been brought down to 13%, and we're still working to fill those vacancies.
The creation of a master plan, city investment in capital projects and safety and marketing, and of course private investment, have all contributed to bringing downtown Miamisburg back to life.
You can do a lot when you work with people and are transparent of what you're doing. Point out that there is a problem and here's the solution, but we can't do it by ourselves. We need to all be working as a team to make these great things happen in a community. And I'm a big believer in that.
Looking then secondly at the conversion of the federal government's Mound facility, the city's largest employer at the time, over 2,000 good jobs in Miamisburg, and you received bad news about its future just as you were getting ready to become mayor. Take us back to that time and what happened.
I can never forget the date of December 16, 1991. I had defeated the incumbent mayor. I was 2 weeks from becoming the mayor. I was mayor-elect. I'm out in Las Vegas, Nevada at a National League of Cities convention, and the then city manager, John Weihoffer, he called me and he said, here again, I'll never forget this, "Are you sitting down?" And I said, "No, but I think I better be," because I says, "You don't sound very happy." And he says, "Well, I just got called to the Mound, and federal government's going to close the Mound facility." The Mound facility was not an issue during the campaign whatsoever. We were moving along as a community, and this was devastating news.
At first, the city's strategy was to fight the decision to close Mound. But when the mayor and city manager traveled to Washington for the first time to make their case, the message was not well received by one Department of Energy official.
After we explained to him who we were and that if they were going to close it and they weren't going to keep it open, we expected that it was going to be cleaned up to where it was before they purchased the land. And he looked at us and he made this statement. He says, "I don't have to answer to the mayor or the city manager of Miami, Ohio." And I said, "Sir, it's Miamisburg, Ohio." And he said it again. "I don't have to answer to the two officials that are here from Miami, Ohio." And I said, "Sir, my name is Church. Remember the name." And we left. And he motivated me to prove them wrong. And every time that we would proceed and these bumps in the road would happen, I would think back to that first day, and I thought, they're not going to defeat us. We found out from the very beginning that squeaky wheel, we were there every 6 weeks, and we would just keep fighting for what we knew was right. We worked with the local officials. We worked very close with our congressional delegation.
Even before he took office, he's got this mess on his hands. What is he going to do? It's this major employer in town, and you can imagine how that hit him. And but he rose to the occasion, and you can see the results years later.
So now we're faced with, okay, we can't keep it open. Now we got to clean it up. And we switched gears immediately, and our delegation helped us. Tony Hall left office, Mike Turner came in. Can't say enough for the help that Mike Turner gave us, and along with John Glenn, he was still our senator. Dave Hobson was another congressional person, represented Springfield, far removed from Miamisburg, and he got on board with us. We came back, we formed the Miamisburg Mound Community Improvement Corporation, and we named Mike Gerwellman, our city planner, as the president of that, and Mike kept that job for over 20 years. No one even questioned what we were doing. I mean, they knew we were there to represent them. If we weren't successful in what we were striving to do, they could have locked the gates and walked away from all that mess up there. But made a lot of good friends with DOE, made a few enemies, and but we were successful.
Fought tooth and nail at times.
Fought tooth and nail.
And would it be safe to say that you were a familiar face in D.C.?
Well, we were. In fact, one assistant secretary that got back to me, he didn't say this to my face, but it got back to me that he told his secretary, keep that damn mayor out of my office. And I thought that was a compliment, you know. You got to be a pain in the neck sometimes to accomplish your goal. When I look around the mound site and how it's got cleaned up, the concertina wire is all gone. We're trying to make a business park out of a former nuclear energy site. It's a good location now, it's cleaned up, and I see nothing but success for the mound moving forward.
I rise today to pay tribute and congratulate my good friend, Miamisburg Mayor Dick Church, on his retirement. Dick Church has faithfully served the city of Miamisburg as mayor since 1992 and as a Miamisburg city councilman for 4 years prior to that. He is the longest serving mayor in Miamisburg's history. Mayor Church has transformed Miamisburg into an economic powerhouse, a thriving downtown, and safe and stable neighborhoods. In addition, his legacy has been the cleanup of a former U.S. Department of Energy Cold War-era defense production and deep space energy site in his community known as Mound Laboratories. Mayor Church has worked to make the Mound facility viable for businesses again, continuing the facility's legacy and Southwest Ohio's spirit of innovation. The Mound Business Park is now home to 15 businesses that conduct important research and development. The Mound Business Park's development could not have come to fruition without Dick Church's crucial work. Now, Dick Church has been a hands-on mayor. In many communities, almost everyone can say they know the mayor. In Miamisburg, the mayor can say he practically knows everyone. Congratulations, Dick Church, on an incredible career as mayor. I yield back.
A common thread between these two success stories, the Mound facility reuse and downtown revitalization, has been a strong emphasis by the city of Miamisburg to work with others to get things done. That theme can also be seen in Mayor Church's general approach to working with neighboring communities. One of the close relationships that the city of Miamisburg has is with Miami Township, but it wasn't always that way.
No.
Describe what that relationship was when you first entered office between city officials and township officials, and what it's like today.
Well, back when I first entered office, there were all kinds of controversies, mostly over annexations. And about 10, 12 years ago, new leaders came into Miami Township, and we saw it as an opportunity to start working together. And it's been a terrific relationship.
The mayor cites 3 positive outcomes that have resulted from that improved partnership: the formation of the Miami Valley Fire District, completion of the Austin Center interchange on I-75, and the jointly run Hillgrove Union Cemetery in Miamisburg. He supports that same approach throughout the Miami Valley region.
And I've been a big advocate for regional cooperation, and that is so important. What goes on in Dayton and the surrounding areas affects the cities outside the city of Dayton. If we don't work together to help one another to make great things happen, you're not going to go anywhere. They kind of tagged me as Mr. Regionalism through the Mayor's Managers Association. But I totally believe if we don't work together, we're going to sink together.
And you have devoted significant time on regional boards and committees and all that type of thing. You've taken an active role in that regard.
I chair 4 different committees for the Montgomery County. And solid waste, emergency management, the regional dispatch center, just to name a few. All these things are important. Let's go back to solid waste. 26 communities, and I'm talking about cities and townships, have banded together to have a facility that people can bring their trash and their recyclables, and it will be disposed of in a professional manner. And that committee alone is probably one of the best examples of regional cooperation.
He's just a warm person, and it's almost like you're his best friend in the world. And he's been so instrumental on issues with SWAC-SWAMC. And this is basically dealing with 28 different jurisdictions as far as our trash disposal. And we've closed a North Incinerator, and he was very active in that, as well as putting together a 10-year new landfill contract. So again, he's been very active, very down to earth. He doesn't mess around.
Your favorite expression as mayor has been great things are happening in Miamisburg.
Right.
You feel that down to your bones, don't you?
Sure do. Early on, when all this stuff was going on with DOE and with different things we were doing as a community, I knew I needed a tagline. So at the end of each council meeting, I would say, and remember, great things are happening in Miamisburg. I'd say that every time. If I made a speech, great things are happening in Miamisburg. And you know what? People really started believing it, because there are great things happening here. It's just my way of trying to get the people to stop for a minute and say, there are good things happening in Miamisburg. I believe it, and I hope they believe it, and damn, I love this town. But I tell you, I can keep busy. People stopping in, visiting schools at their request, talking to kids about government, doing tours, working with the business community. I'm busy. I'm busy. Sunday, supposed to be a day off. I'm going to be delivering a proclamation to a woman that's turning 90 years old, and that's what I like. To me, a mayor needs to be visible in the community, and I've tried to do that.
Is that the best part of the job?
That's the best part of the job.
Now, your successor has all but been determined.
Yes.
It hasn't been decided at the ballot box, but it looks like you know who your successor will be.
I know who the successor is, and in fact, I joked with her when she cast her vote that day. She is the mayor-elect of Miamisburg. Michelle Collins brings a lot to the table. She's a Miamisburg High School graduate. She has a business here at Collins Real Estate. She knows a lot of people. She's been active in the community on different functions and different capacities. And this is a message I really want to get across to people. Just because Dick Church did it that way doesn't mean Michelle Collins has to do it that way. She'll be her own person. She'll be her own mayor. And she will build into a good mayor. And I hope they give her the same support and backing that they give me.
He's the kind of man that that we need to have in politics, that we need to have in higher office. Martin Luther said 500 years ago, he said, we need to send our good people into the church, we need to send our best into politics. And with Mayor Church, we sent our best.
What are you going to take with you when all this is done?
I was out in the hallway. Gentleman come in, probably a few years younger than me, and shakes my hand. But he went on to thank me for what's been accomplished. That's what I'll take. And also, you know, once you have a title, that title sticks with you. So, I love being called the mayor.